The bullet shattered the whiskey bottle before the man even finished pouring, and every head in the saloon turned to see the woman holstering her revolver with the kind of casual grace most men reserved for breathing. Paradise. Nevada was not a town where women typically carried guns, let alone used them with the precision of a surgeon and the speed of lightning. But Beatrice Vance was not a typical woman, and when she walked through those swinging doors on that scorching July afternoon in 1882, she brought with her a reputation that preceded her like thunder before a storm. The men parted without thinking, creating a path to the bar where she calmly ordered a glass of water, not whiskey, and waited for the inevitable challenge that always came. "That was my bottle," a gruff voice said from the corner. The speaker was a mountain of a man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, a known gunslinger who went by the name of Dutch Morgan. He had killed 3 men in the past year alone, and his hand was already hovering near his holster. Beatrice turned slowly, her dark hair catching the light filtering through the dusty windows. She was 24 years old, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a face that would have been beautiful if not for the hardness that living on the frontier had carved into her features. "Then you should not have been pouring it for a man who was about to bet his daughter in a card game," she said evenly, nodding toward the table where a weathered rancher sat frozen, his cards still clutched in his trembling hands. The saloon went silent. Dutch Morgan's eyes narrowed, but he looked at the rancher, then back at Beatrice. "That is none of your business, woman." "It is everyone's business when a man forgets his humanity," Beatrice replied. "Now, are you going to draw or are you going to sit back down and finish your game without any more foolish wagers?" For a long moment no one breathed. Then Dutch Morgan laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "I heard about you. Beatrice Vance, the woman who can outshoot any man. They say you learned from your daddy before he was killed by road agents up in Virginia City." "They say correctly," Beatrice said, and there was no emotion in her voice, though the memory of finding her father's body 5 years ago still haunted her dreams. Dutch Morgan nodded slowly and sat back down. "Another time, perhaps." Beatrice turned back to her water, and the saloon gradually resumed its normal noise level, though every man there kept one eye on her. She had just taken her first sip when a voice beside her said, "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I have seen all year." She glanced to her right and found herself looking at a cowboy who could not have been more than 26 or 27 years old. He had sandy hair that curled slightly at his collar, blue eyes that held both intelligence and kindness, and a face that was honest in a way that seemed out of place in a Nevada saloon. He wore working clothes, dusty from the trail, and his gun sat low on his hip in a worn holster that suggested use, but not the kind of use that came from seeking fights. "Perhaps both," Beatrice said. "Who is asking?" "Emmett Rivers," the cowboy said, extending his hand. "I run a small ranch about 10 miles north of here. Been in town to sell some horses and heard the commotion." Beatrice shook his hand, noting the calluses and the firm grip. "Beatrice Vance." "I know," Emmett said, and when she raised an eyebrow he added quickly, "Your reputation is considerable. They say you once shot a playing card edge on from 50 paces. 40 paces, Beatrice corrected. "And it was a foolish bet made by a foolish man who thought no woman could shoot." Emmett smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less serious. "I do not doubt women can do anything men can do. I was raised by my mother after my father died, and she ran our ranch in Texas for 10 years before we moved here. She could outwork, outthink, and outcuss any man I ever met." Something in Beatrice's expression softened slightly. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Emmett said, and the past tense told its own story. She passed 2 years ago, pneumonia. I moved the operation here to Nevada because she always wanted to see the mountains before she died, and I figured I could at least live where she wanted to be. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, and then Emmett said something that surprised Beatrice more than anything else that had happened that day. "Teach me your secrets." She turned to look at him fully. "What?" "Teach me to shoot like you do," Emmett said, and there was no challenge in his voice, only genuine interest. "I can hit what I aim at, but I have never seen anyone move like you just did. The way you drew, the certainty of your shot, that is not just practice. That is art." Beatrice studied him carefully, looking for mockery or hidden motives, but found none. "Why would you want to learn from a woman?" "Why would I not want to learn from the best?" Emmett countered. "My pride is not so fragile that I cannot admit when someone has a skill I lack. And besides, I am tired of just being adequate. There are threats out here, claim jumpers and rustlers and worse. I want to be able to protect what is mine, and more importantly, I want to be able to protect others who cannot protect themselves." It was the last part that decided Beatrice. She had spent the past 5 years drifting from town to town, using her skills to help where she could, but never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. The loneliness had become a constant companion, as familiar as her revolver, but she had convinced herself it was the price of the life she had chosen. Now, looking at this honest cowboy with his earnest request, she felt something shift inside her chest. "I will teach you," she said finally. "But I will not go easy on you because you are a man, and I will not tolerate excuses." Emmett's smile returned, bright and genuine. "I would not expect anything less. When can we start?" "Tomorrow morning," Beatrice said. "Dawn, where is your ranch?" "Follow the north road out of town until you reach a creek with a cottonwood tree split by lightning. Turn east and you will see the buildings about a mile in. There is a sign that says Rivers Ranch, though the paint is fading." Beatrice nodded. "I will be there." She finished her water and turned to leave, but Emmett's voice stopped her. "Miss Vance, thank you. This means more to me than you might realize." Beatrice did not trust herself to respond, so she simply nodded and walked out into the blistering Nevada heat, her mind already racing with thoughts of what she had agreed to, and why the prospect of seeing Emmett Rivers again made her heart beat just a little faster. That night, in the small room she rented above the general store, Beatrice cleaned her revolver and thought about her father. Jack Vance had been a professional shooter who performed in traveling shows before settling down to try ranching in Nevada. He had taught his daughter everything he knew, from the mechanics of the weapon to the mental discipline required for precision shooting. But more than that, he had taught her that skill was not determined by gender, but by dedication and practice. When he died, Beatrice had been 19 years old and alone in the world. She could have married, could have found some man to take care of her, but the thought of giving up her independence had been unbearable. Instead, she had taken her father's guns and his lessons and made a life for herself, such as it was. She performed in some shows, gave shooting lessons to those willing to pay, and occasionally hired herself out as protection for travelers crossing dangerous territory. It was not the life her father had wanted for her, but it was honest work, and it kept her fed. Now, lying in the darkness and listening to the sounds of paradise settling down for the night, Beatrice wondered what had possessed her to agree to teach Emmett Rivers. She told herself it was just another job, another student, but she knew that was a lie. There had been something in his eyes, a warmth and respect that she had not seen in a long time, and it had cracked something in the walls she had built around herself. Dawn came with the purple and gold light that made the desert beautiful despite its harshness. Beatrice saddled her horse, a dun mare named Sagebrush who had been her companion for 3 years and rode north out of Paradise. The heat was already building, promising another scorching day, but the morning air still held a hint of coolness. She found the split cottonwood easily and turned east, and soon the buildings of Rivers Ranch came into view. It was a modest spread, well maintained but clearly the work of one man rather than a large crew. There was a ranch house built of wood and stone, a barn that looked recently repaired, and several corrals where horses moved in the early morning light. Emmett was waiting by the largest corral, and when he saw her approach, he waved. "You are punctual," he called out as she dismounted. "I like that." "Time is precious," Beatrice said. "We should not waste it." Emmett led her to an area behind the barn where he had set up targets, tin cans on fence posts at varying distances. "I thought we could start with whatever you think is most important," he said. "I am in your hands." Beatrice walked the area, checking angles and backgrounds to ensure safety. "Show me what you can do," she said. "Draw and fire at that can on the left." Emmett nodded, took a breath, and drew. His motion was practiced but not smooth, and there was a slight hitch as he brought the gun up. He fired, and the bullet struck the post below the can, sending splinters flying. "Not bad," Beatrice said honestly, "but you are thinking too much. Your body knows what to do, but your mind is getting in the way." "What do you mean?" Emmett asked, lowering his weapon. Beatrice stepped closer to him. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his gun hand. "Of course." She took his wrist gently, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Here," she said. "You are gripping too hard, which makes you slow. The gun should be an extension of your arm, not something you are strangling. And here," she moved her hand to his shoulder. "You are raising your entire arm instead of letting the draw be a fluid motion from hip to target." Emmett was very still as she adjusted his position, and Beatrice was acutely aware of how close they were standing. She could smell leather and soap and something else, something uniquely him. She stepped back quickly, suddenly flustered in a way she had not been since she was a girl. "Try again," she said, her voice slightly rougher than she intended. This time, when Emmett drew, his motion was smoother. The bullet struck the can and sent it flying. His face lit up with surprise and pleasure. That was different. That felt right. "Because it was right," Beatrice said, relaxing slightly. "Again." They spent the next 2 hours working on his draw, and Beatrice found herself enjoying the teaching more than she had expected. Emmett was a quick learner, attentive and willing to try things multiple ways until he found what worked. He also did not complain, even when Beatrice pushed him to repeat the same motion dozens of times. When the sun had climbed high enough to make the heat oppressive, Emmett called a break. "Come inside," he said. "I have cold water from the well and you must be thirsty." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home. There were curtains on the windows, a rag rug on the floor, and books on a shelf by the fireplace. Emmett saw her looking and said, "My mother's touches. I kept everything the way she liked it. It seems wrong to change it." "It is a good home," Beatrice said, accepting the cup of water he offered. They sat at the kitchen table, and for a while they just drank in silence. Then Emmett said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Beatrice tensed slightly. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Why do you do this?" "The shooting, the traveling. It must be lonely." The question was so direct and so accurate that Beatrice almost stood up and left. But something in Emmett's expression stopped her. He was not prying for gossip or trying to find a weakness. He genuinely wanted to understand. "It is lonely," she admitted, "but it is also free. When my father died, I had a choice. I could become dependent on others, or I could use what he taught me to make my own way. I chose independence." "But independence and loneliness do not have to be the same thing," Emmett said quietly. "Do they not?" Beatrice asked. I have yet to meet a man who can accept a woman who can outshoot him, who does not need him to protect her, who makes her own choices. Emmett met her eyes steadily. Then you have been meeting the wrong men. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Beatrice stood abruptly. We should continue. The day is wasting. They worked for another 2 hours, moving from drawing practice to accuracy at different distances. Beatrice showed Emmett how to adjust for wind, how to compensate for the natural drift of a bullet, how to shoot while moving. He absorbed it all like parched earth absorbing rain, and by the time the afternoon heat forced them to stop, he had improved noticeably. Same time tomorrow. Emmett asked as Beatrice prepared to mount sagebrush. If you wish, Beatrice said, trying to sound casual despite the fact that she was already looking forward to it. I do, Emmett said firmly. Very much. As Beatrice rode back to paradise, she found herself smiling, a rare expression that felt strange on her face. She was still smiling when she reached her room, and it was only when she caught sight of herself in the small mirror that she realized how different she looked. Softer, somehow. Younger. The pattern continued for the next week. Each morning, Beatrice rode to Rivers Ranch, and each day, Emmett's skills improved. But more than that, they talked. During breaks, over simple lunches that Emmett prepared, they shared stories of their lives. Beatrice learned that Emmett had a younger sister living in California, married to a schoolteacher, and that he sent her money when he could. Emmett learned that Beatrice had once dreamed of being a teacher herself before her father's death changed everything. You still could, Emmett said one afternoon as they sat in the shade of the barn, eating bread and cheese. Teach, I mean. Not just shooting, though you are excellent at that, but regular school teaching. Beatrice shook her head. No town would hire a woman like me. I have a reputation, and not the kind that gets you invited to tea parties and school board meetings. Then they are fools, Emmett said with feeling. You are one of the smartest people I have ever met, man or woman. The way you explain things, the patience you have. Those children would be lucky to have you. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Nevada sun. You barely know me. I know enough, Emmett said, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. I know you are brave and skilled and kind, even though you try to hide it behind that tough exterior. I know you helped that rancher in the saloon without any thought of payment or recognition. I know you have spent a week teaching me without once asking what I can afford to pay you. About that, Beatrice said, seizing on the practical topic to avoid the emotional one. We should discuss your fee. How about dinner? Emmett said. Beatrice blinked. What? Have dinner with me? Not as payment, but because I want to spend time with you that does not involve guns or shooting. Just you and me and a conversation. Emmett, Beatrice began, but he held up a hand. I know what you are going to say, that you do not stay anywhere long, that you have your own life and your own path, that I should not get attached. But Beatrice, I am already attached. I have been since you walked into that saloon and stood up to Dutch Morgan without a hint of fear. I am not asking you to marry me or even to promise me anything. I am just asking for one dinner. Can you give me that? Beatrice wanted to say no. Every instinct she had developed over 5 years of protecting herself screamed at her to refuse, to finish the lessons and ride away from paradise, and never look back. But those same instincts had left her lonely and drifting, and as she looked at Emmett's honest, hopeful face, she found she could not bear the thought of hurting him. One dinner, she said finally, but I will bring the food. You have fed me enough this week. Emmett's smile could have lit the entire Nevada desert. Tomorrow night, Beatrice agreed, and wondered what she had just set in motion. She spent the next day in a state of nervous energy that was completely foreign to her. She bought supplies from the general store, including flour and sugar and dried fruit, and spent the afternoon baking pies in the communal kitchen behind the boarding house. The other women there watched her with undisguised curiosity, but Beatrice ignored their whispers and focused on making sure the crusts were perfect. When she rode out to Rivers Ranch that evening, she had saddlebags full of food and a heart beating so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Emmett was waiting on the porch, and he had clearly made an effort as well. He wore clean clothes and his hair was combed, and he had shaved so recently she could still smell the soap. "You look beautiful," he said as she dismounted, and there was such sincerity in his voice that Beatrice could not even attempt to deflect the compliment. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You look very handsome." They ate on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. Beatrice had made fried chicken and biscuits and 2 apple pies, and Emmett ate like a man who had not seen home cooking in years. "This is incredible," he said around a mouthful of pie. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother, before she died when I was 12, Beatrice said. "She said every woman should know how to feed herself and anyone else who needed feeding. My father said every woman should know how to protect herself and anyone else who needed protecting. Between the two of them, I was well educated." "They sound like remarkable people," Emmett said. "They were," Beatrice said, and realized it was the first time in years she had talked about them without feeling the sharp stab of grief. "They loved each other very much. My father never remarried after my mother died. He said she was the only woman for him, and no one else could ever compare." "That is how I want to love someone," Emmett said quietly, "with that kind of certainty and commitment." Beatrice looked at him, at the way the fading light caught his features, and felt something in her chest crack open. "Emmett, I am not good at this. Relationships, feelings, any of it. I have spent so long being alone that I do not know if I remember how to be with someone." Emmett reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused and solid, and Beatrice felt an absurd urge to cry. "Then we will figure it out together," he said. "I'm not some smooth-talking gambler or experienced romantic. I am just a rancher who thinks you are the most extraordinary woman he has ever met, and who would very much like the chance to see where this goes." "What if I leave?" Beatrice asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I cannot stay?" "Then I will enjoy every moment I have with you and be grateful for them," Emmett said simply. "But Beatrice, what if you stay? What if you find that you can have both independence and companionship? What if you let yourself be happy?" No one had asked her that before. No one had suggested that she deserved happiness, that it was something she could choose. Beatrice looked at their joined hands, at the ranch spread out before them, at the vast Nevada sky turning dark above them, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "I would like to try," she whispered. Emmett's smile was gentle and full of promise. "That is all I ask." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Beatrice did not move. When his lips touched hers, it was soft and sweet and careful, a question more than a demand. Beatrice answered by kissing him back, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek, feeling the smoothness of his recent shave and the warmth of his skin. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing slightly harder, Emmett rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the first day," he admitted. "I know," Beatrice said, surprising herself with a small laugh. "You are not as subtle as you think you are." "Good," Emmett said. "I am tired of being subtle." They sat on that porch until the stars came out in their thousands, talking and kissing and planning. Emmett wanted to know if Beatrice would continue teaching him, and she said yes. Beatrice wanted to know if Emmett would mind if she set up a shooting range on his property to teach others, and he was enthusiastic about the idea. They talked about the ranch, about the horses Emmett was breeding, about the possibility of Beatrice performing in shooting exhibitions again if she had a home base to return to. "Is that what this could be?" Beatrice asked as the night grew late. "A home base?" "It could be just a home," Emmett said, "if you wanted it to be." Beatrice looked at the ranch house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the solid, honest man beside her, and felt something she had not felt in 5 years. She felt like she could rest. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Beatrice had trouble believing was real. She moved her few belongings from the boarding house to Rivers Ranch, taking the small bedroom that had belonged to Emmett's mother. Emmett was a perfect gentleman, never pressuring her for more than she was ready to give. But the tension between them grew sweeter and more intense with each passing day. Beatrice continued teaching Emmett, and his skills improved to the point where he could hit a moving target more often than not. But more than that, they worked the ranch together. Beatrice proved to be an excellent horse trainer, with a gentle touch that the animals responded to. Emmett was a skilled carpenter, and spent his spare time building a proper shooting range with multiple target areas, and a small covered pavilion where Beatrice could teach students out of the sun. Word spread about Beatrice Vance settling at Rivers Ranch, and soon people were coming from Paradise and beyond to take lessons. She taught men and women both, charging fair rates and insisting on safety above all else. Some men balked at learning from a woman, but after watching her shoot, they quickly swallowed their pride. Some women came hesitantly, unsure if it was proper, but Beatrice's firm encouragement and obvious skill gave them confidence. One afternoon, about 2 months after that first dinner, Beatrice was teaching a lesson to a young woman from Paradise when she saw riders approaching. There were 4 of them, and even from a distance, she recognized the lead rider, Dutch Morgan. She finished the lesson calmly, sent her student on her way, and then checked her revolver. Emmett emerged from the barn, saw the riders, and came to stand beside her. "Trouble?" he asked quietly. "Maybe," Beatrice said. "Stay close." Dutch Morgan and his men rode into the yard and stopped. The gunslinger looked older in the bright sunlight, more tired but no less dangerous. "Miss Vance," he said, touching his hat brim in a mockery of courtesy. "Mr. Morgan," Beatrice replied evenly. "What brings you to Rivers Ranch? Heard you were teaching shooting," Dutch said. "Thought I might want some lessons." "I do not believe that is true," Beatrice said. "Why are you really here?" Dutch's expression hardened. "I am here because you embarrassed me in that saloon, because you made me back down in front of the whole town, and I am not a man who forgets such things." Emmett's hand moved toward his gun, but Beatrice touched his arm gently, stopping him. "You backed down because you knew you were in the wrong," she said to Dutch, "and because you knew if you drew on me, you would lose." "That is a bold claim," Dutch said, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "It is the truth," Beatrice said calmly. "You are fast, Dutch, but you rely on intimidation. You have for so long that you have forgotten what it means to face someone who is not afraid of you. I am not afraid of you. I never have been." For a long moment, Dutch stared at her, and Beatrice could see the calculation in his eyes. She kept her hand away from her gun, her posture relaxed but ready. Finally, Dutch laughed, the same rock-grinding sound from the saloon. "You are either crazy or the bravest woman I ever met." "Perhaps both," Beatrice said, echoing her words from that first day. Dutch nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by dismounting. "Truth is, I am tired, Miss Vance. Tired of this life, tired of being looked at like I am some kind of monster. I am 43 years old, and I have no home, no family, nothing but a reputation that is more burden than benefit. When I saw you in that saloon, standing up for what was right without thought of the cost, I realized I have not done anything right in a very long time. Beatrice studied him carefully, looking for deception, but found only weary honesty. "What do you want, Dutch?" "Work if you can spare it," Dutch said, and now he looked at Emmett. "I was a rancher once, long time ago in Texas before everything went wrong. I know horses and cattle and hard work. I am willing to labor for my keep and a chance to be something other than what I have become." Emmett looked at Beatrice, a question in his eyes. She gave the smallest nod, trusting his judgment on his own ranch. Emmett turned to Dutch and said, "I can use a hand with the horses, and we are planning to expand the operation, but I will not have trouble here. This is a place of peace, and I intend to keep it that way." "I can respect that," Dutch said. "You have my word." "Then you have a job," Emmett said. "Bunkhouse is behind the barn. Pay is $30 a month plus meals." Dutch nodded gratefully. "What about them?" he asked, gesturing to his 3 companions. "They can stay if they are willing to work and follow the same rules," Emmett said. 2 of the men agreed immediately. The third, a young hothead with scars on his hands, shook his head. "I do not take orders from women," he said, glaring at Beatrice. "Then you should ride on," Emmett said firmly, "because Miss Vance is my partner, and anyone who does not respect her does not work here." The young man's face flushed with anger and his hand dropped to his gun. But faster than anyone could blink, Beatrice drew and fired, the bullet kicking up dirt between the young man's feet. "I suggest you reconsider your plans," she said quietly, her revolver still aimed at him. "Because the next shot will not be a warning." The young man paled, then wheeled his horse and rode off without another word. Dutch watched him go and then turned to Beatrice. "I would have stopped him if you had not done that, for what it is worth." "I know," Beatrice said, holstering her weapon. "That is why I agreed to let you stay." The addition of Dutch and his 2 men, whose names turned out to be Samuel and Tom, changed the dynamics at Rivers Ranch. They were hard workers who knew their business, and under Emmett's direction, the ranch began to prosper in earnest. Dutch in particular seemed determined to atone for his past, working longer hours than anyone else, and showing patience with the horses that surprised everyone. One evening, about a month after Dutch arrived, Beatrice was practicing her draw when Dutch approached. "Can I ask you something, Miss Vance?" "Of course," Beatrice said, reloading her revolver. "How did you get so fast? I have been shooting my whole life, and I have never seen anyone move like you do." Beatrice considered the question. "My father used to say that speed without accuracy is meaningless, but accuracy without speed gets you killed. So he taught me both, starting when I was 8 years old. Every day, for years, we practiced. Not just the physical movements, but the mental discipline. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to see everything without focusing on any one thing, to let instinct and training guide your hand." "Will you teach me?" Dutch asked, and there was none of his usual bravado, just honest interest. Beatrice smiled. "I thought you might ask." "Yes, I will teach you, but you should know, Emmett has already surpassed you." Dutch looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Rivers is a good man. He deserves this place and someone like you to share it with." "I think so too," Beatrice said, and realized with a start that she truly meant it. That night, as she and Emmett sat on the porch watching the sunset, Beatrice said, "I need to tell you something." Emmett looked at her with concern. "That sounds serious." "It is," Beatrice said, taking a deep breath. "I love you. I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it because I have never said it to anyone before. Not like this. But you should know, Emmett Rivers, that you have completely stolen my heart, and I cannot imagine my life without you anymore." For a moment, Emmett just stared at her, his blue eyes wide with surprise and joy. Then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. God, Beatrice, I love you so much. I have been waiting for you to be ready, but there has not been a day since we met that I have not loved you. They kissed then, deep and passionate, with none of the careful restraint of their previous kisses. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Emmett said, "Marry me." Beatrice laughed, surprised. "That is not a question." "Yes, it is," Emmett said, grinning. "Marry me." "That is barely better," Beatrice said, but she was laughing too, feeling lighter and happier than she had in her entire life. "Yes, Emmett Rivers, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in Paradise, in a simple ceremony attended by half the town. Dutch Morgan stood up as Emmett's best man, which raised some eyebrows but also spoke to the remarkable transformation the gunslinger had undergone. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, and Emmett wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows, there was not a dry eye in the church. The celebration afterward was held at Rivers Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by seemingly everyone in Paradise. Beatrice danced with her new husband under strings of lanterns, and when Emmett whispered, "I am the luckiest man alive," she whispered back, "and I am the luckiest woman." That night, in the privacy of the ranch house that was now fully their shared home, Beatrice and Emmett consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Afterward, lying in Emmett's arms, Beatrice marveled at how much her life had changed. She had gone from a lonely drifter to a wife with a home and a future, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The years that followed were marked by hard work and deep happiness. Beatrice continued her shooting lessons, and her reputation grew until people came from as far as California to learn from her. Emmett expanded the ranch, breeding horses that were prized throughout Nevada and beyond. Together, they built something lasting and good. Dutch Morgan worked at Rivers Ranch for 3 years before deciding to move to California to be near his sister, whom he had not seen in 15 years. When he left, he shook Emmett's hand and hugged Beatrice, thanking them both for giving him a chance to be a better man. "You saved my life," he told Beatrice. "In that saloon when you faced me down, you gave me a reason to change. I will never forget that." "You saved yourself," Beatrice said. "We just gave you the opportunity." 2 years after their marriage, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. Emmett was overjoyed, treating her like she was made of glass, until she threatened to shoot him if he did not stop hovering. Their son, Jack, named after Beatrice's father, was born in the spring of 1885, a healthy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Watching Emmett with their son, seeing the gentle way he held the baby and the love in his eyes, Beatrice fell in love with him all over again. "You are going to be a wonderful father," she told him one night as they stood over Jack's cradle. "I have a wonderful example in you," Emmett replied, putting his arm around her. "You are already the best mother." Jack was followed by a daughter, Rose, 2 years later, and then another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Beatrice found that she loved being a mother as much as she loved shooting and teaching. She had worried that motherhood would somehow diminish her independence, but instead, she found it expanded who she was. She continued to teach, though less frequently, and her children grew up understanding that their mother was someone special. Jack, at 6 years old, loved to watch his mother practice, his eyes wide with admiration. Rose, at 4, declared that she wanted to shoot like her mother when she grew up. And Thomas, at 2, was too young to understand but clapped his hands with delight whenever he saw his mother draw her revolver. One evening, when Jack was 8, Rose was 6, and Thomas was 4, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become a tradition, this quiet time together, a way to mark the end of the day and count their blessings. "Mama," Jack said suddenly. "Samuel says you are the best shot in the whole West. Is that true?" Beatrice smiled. Samuel, one of the original hands who still worked at the ranch, had a tendency to exaggerate, but she could not deny she was skilled. "I am very good," she said, "but there is always someone better, somewhere." "Not better than you," Jack said firmly, with the absolute certainty of childhood. Emmett laughed and pulled Beatrice close. "Your son has a point. I have never seen anyone who can match you." "That is because you are biased," Beatrice said, but she was pleased nonetheless. "Papa," Rose piped up, "tell us the story of how you met Mama." It was a story they had heard dozens of times, but they never tired of it. Emmett launched into the tale, embellishing the details to make the children laugh, and Beatrice listened with a smile on her face. When he got to the part where he asked her to teach him, Jack interrupted. "That was smart, Papa. You knew Mama was special." "I did," Emmett agreed. "I knew the moment I saw her that she was going to change my life." "And did she?" Rose asked. "She did," Emmett said, meeting Beatrice's eyes over their children's heads. "She changed everything. Made it all better than I ever imagined it could be." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from overwhelming happiness. She looked at her husband, at her children, at the ranch spread out before them in the fading light, and thought about the scared, lonely woman who had walked into a paradise saloon all those years ago. That woman would never have believed she could have this, all of this love and family and home. But she had found it anyway with a cowboy who had said, "Teach me your secrets," and ended up learning so much more than how to shoot. He had learned who she was, truly was, and had loved her anyway. Had loved her because of it, not in spite of it. "I love you," she whispered to Emmett. "I love you too," he whispered back. "Always." As the sun finally set and the stars began to emerge, Beatrice Vance Rivers sat surrounded by her family and felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. She had spent so long believing that she had to choose between her skills and her happiness, between her independence and her need for connection. But Emmett had shown her that she could have both, that the right person would never ask her to be less than who she was. Years continued to pass in this manner, each one building on the foundation of love and respect that Beatrice and Emmett had established. The children grew strong and capable, each inheriting their mother's determination and their father's kindness. Jack became a skilled horseman who helped run the ranch. Rose did indeed learn to shoot, becoming nearly as proficient as her mother and eventually teaching alongside her. Thomas showed a talent for business and helped expand the ranch's horse trading operation to include buyers from as far as Chicago. Beatrice's shooting school became legendary, and she trained countless students over the years, men and women both. Many of her female students told her that she had given them not just skills but confidence, the knowledge that they could protect themselves and those they loved. It was a legacy Beatrice was deeply proud of. When Beatrice and Emmett celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1909, the entire town of Paradise turned out for the celebration. They were no longer the young cowboy and the wandering shooter who had met in a saloon. They were pillars of the community, respected and loved by all who knew them. Standing on their porch that evening watching their children, now grown with families of their own, Beatrice leaned into Emmett's embrace. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" she asked. "No," Emmett admitted. "I imagined it would be good, but I never imagined it would be this wonderful." "Neither did I," Beatrice said softly. "That day in the saloon when you asked me to teach you, I thought I was just taking on another student. I never dreamed I was meeting my future." "Best decision I ever made," Emmett said, kissing her temple. "Asking you to teach me your secrets." Beatrice smiled. "The secret was not in the shooting. It was in being brave enough to be vulnerable to let someone in." "We were both brave," Emmett said. "You were brave enough to stay, and I was brave enough to ask you to." They stood together as the evening deepened, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, the ranch they had built, the family they had created, the love they had nurtured. Paradise, Nevada had lived up to its name for them, providing a place where a woman who could outshoot any man and a cowboy who was not afraid to learn from her could build something beautiful. The story of Beatrice Vance and Emmett Rivers became part of local legend, told and retold over the years. People spoke of the shooting exhibition where Beatrice, at 60 years old, hit every target without a single miss, her hand still steady and her eye still true. They spoke of Emmett's devotion to his wife, the way he looked at her even after decades of marriage as if she were the most precious thing in the world. They spoke of the Rivers Ranch as a place where anyone, regardless of their past, could find redemption and a new start. But more than the legend, more than the stories, was the simple truth of two people who had found each other in the vast, harsh beauty of the Nevada desert and had chosen to build a life together. A life based on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a love that grew deeper with each passing year. As they grew old together, their love never diminished. Beatrice taught shooting until she was 70, only stopping when her eyesight finally began to fail. Emmett ran the ranch with help from their children and grandchildren until he was 75, when he finally agreed to hand over the day-to-day operations to Jack. But they never stopped being partners, never stopped facing each morning together and ending each evening side by side on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in brilliant colors. When Emmett died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, with Beatrice holding his hand, she was devastated but also grateful. They had been given 56 years together, more than half a century of love and partnership. At his funeral, she stood straight and dry-eyed, telling anyone who offered condolences that she would not cry because she had no regrets. They had lived fully, loved completely, and built something that would last long after they were both gone. Beatrice lived for 2 more years after Emmett's death, cared for by her children but still fiercely independent. She spent her days reading the books from Emmett's shelf, writing down memories of their life together for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and sitting on the porch where they had shared so many evenings. On the day she died, surrounded by 3 generations of family, her last words were about Emmett. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered to Rose, who held her hand. "Tell him I love him and I am coming home." They buried her next to Emmett on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read Beatrice Vance Rivers, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, the woman who could outshoot any man and won the heart of the best man. And next to it, Emmett's headstone read Emmett Rivers, beloved husband, father, grandfather, the cowboy who was wise enough to learn. The ranch continued to operate for generations, run by their descendants who never forgot the story of how it all began. The shooting range Beatrice had built was maintained and expanded, becoming a training facility that drew people from all over the country. And on quiet evenings, when the sunset painted the sky in gold and purple, people swore they could see 2 figures on the old ranch house porch, sitting together in the peace of a love that had transcended time. The legacy of Beatrice and Emmett was not just in the land they had cultivated or the children they had raised. It was in the example they had set, showing that true partnership meant accepting each other completely, celebrating differences rather than trying to change them, and building something together that was greater than what either could have achieved alone. It was a testament to the truth that the strongest love is built on respect, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. Their story became more than just local legend. It spread beyond Paradise, beyond Nevada, becoming a symbol of what was possible when two people chose to see each other clearly and love what they saw. It inspired countless others to be brave in their own relationships, to refuse to compromise who they were, but also to open their hearts to the possibility of sharing their lives with someone else. And so the woman who could outshoot any man and the cowboy who asked her to teach him her secrets lived on, not just in memory but in the example they had set, the family they had created, and the love that had sustained them through 56 years of marriage and would connect them through eternity. Their story was one of courage, independence, partnership, and above all, a love that had proven stronger than fear, deeper than loneliness, and more enduring than time itself. In the end, the greatest secret Beatrice had taught Emmett was not how to draw faster or shoot straighter. It was how to love completely, without reservation or fear. And Emmett had taught her that allowing herself to be loved did not make her weak, but rather gave her a strength she had never known she needed. Together, they had created a life that honored both their independence and their devotion to each other, proving that the two were not mutually exclusive, but rather beautifully complementary. The sun set over Rivers Ranch for the final time in this story, but the love of Beatrice and Emmett would never truly set. It lived on in their descendants, in the stories told about them, and in the very land they had cultivated together. Paradise, Nevada had been the perfect setting for their love story, a place as wild and beautiful and unforgiving as the frontier itself. And just like the land, their love had proven enduring, tested by time and only growing stronger for it. The woman who could outshoot any man had found the one man who was not threatened by her skill but inspired by it. And together, they had written a love story for the ages.